Hello everyone, welcome back to another chess openings video. In today's video, I'm going to be continuing the Sicilian Najdorf series. And in specific, today we're going to be going over how to play against the English attack. Before we get further on into the video, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. So, let's just go over some basic Sicilian Najdorf moves. Pawn to e4, pawn to c5, knight to f3, pawn to d6, d4, c captures d4, knight captures d4, knight to f6, knight to c3, and pawn to a6. We went over these first couple moves in my last video, so if you want to check that out, it should pop up in the top right of your screen right now. And also in the last video, we covered what would happen if white plays bishop to g5, which is known as the bishop to g5 line. So, in this video, we're actually not going to be going over bishop to g5. This video, we're going to be going over what is known as the English attack, which starts after the move bishop to e3. After this, you have to play pawn to e5 to get rid of that powerful knight in the center. After the knight goes back to b3, you play bishop to e6. And what bishop to e6 does is that it prevents the knight from coming to the d5 square, to the d5 outpost rather. This is because if at any point white plays knight to d5, you simply play bishop captures on d5, and after pawn captures on d5, you continue on with the game. After the moves bishop to e2 and bishop to e7, let me just demonstrate my idea which I just talked about with knight to d5. If they do play knight to d5, you have a couple options. The first option is that you could just take the knight on d5 with bishop takes d5, or even with knight takes d5. However, one thing that you simply cannot do, and this is very important to remember as I've fallen into this trap many times, is knight captures on e4. Because after knight captures on e4, white is actually a lot better than black in this position after bishop to b6. Notice how the knight and bishop work together to infiltrate the black's position. After moves such as, let's say, queen to c8, simply knight to c7 check should be plenty for white to win the game, as now it's a fork on the king and the rook, and wherever you move your king, white always has the option of playing knight takes a8 and winning the game, being up the exchange, and possibly even the entire rook if white can manage to escape with his knight. So we don't want that. So after knight to d5, the best move is to either play bishop takes d5 or simply just knight takes d5. And after white recaptures, you simply play bishop to f5, enjoying this powerful light square diagonal for the rest of the game. So now let's go back to this position when they haven't played knight to d5 yet. The main line follows as queen to d2, and in this position, you just castle your king to safety. And after the move f3, if they play f3, they're actually initiating the following plan of pushing g4, h4, and g5. Regardless of their plan, you continue with your development with knight to d7, strengthening this knight and sometimes in the future, preparing knight to c5. White will most likely castle queenside in this variation of f3, as they do want to expand on your queenside, or on your kingside rather. After this, you have to play b5 to get an advantage in attacking white's queenside, where his king is, or her king is. Now, we do need to note that this entire game is pretty much just going to be a race of who can attack first. As you can see, in these couple moves, white has already gotten his pawn to g5, and also to f4. After a couple trades, and pawn to b4, now you strike the white king, knight to d5, bishop takes d5, pawn takes d5, and pawn to a4, pawn to a5. As you can see, it's a struggle to see who can attack first. Your idea as black should be to play rook to c8 and pawn to a4 to continue the attack on the white's king. And in this position, as black, you're actually doing a lot better than white is doing, as white still has his pawn on h2, and it'll be a couple moves before he can actually reach you. And even if he does reach you with pawn to h6, you simply play pawn to g3 to pretty much blockade white's entire pawn structure. And all while that's going on, you're also going to be attacking the white king side, or the white's king. And you should have a smooth, easy attacking game in this position. Okay, so after you played knight to c7, what if they don't castle queenside? What if they decide to leave their king in the center, instead of castling, play pawn to g4? Now, this is actually extremely common, and I've encountered this many times in my own games. After g4, you simply play pawn to b5, with the same idea as before. If they try to attack your king side, you simply counterattack on their queen side. After a move such as a3, to stop the pawn coming from b4, you play bishop takes b3. And what this does is that after c takes b3, white has this terrible pawn structure on his queen side with the double b pawn and what is possibly a backwards b pawn on b2. After this, you continue the attack with knight to c5, attacking their b3 pawn. Note, if they do bishop takes c5, then you should be extremely happy with your position after d takes c5, as now you have the open file for your queen. And also, you could just exchange queens and bring the other rook into the game as well, controlling the d file nonetheless. After this, white's best option is actually to play bishop to d1 to guard the b3 pawn. You continue the attack with pawn to a5, with the idea of playing pawn to b4. By now, you're probably getting that pawn to b4 is actually a fairly common move in this variation. Whenever they try to attack you with g5, you simply counterattack with b4. Just as you're going to see right now, pawn to g5 and pawn to b4. A takes b4, a takes b4, and if they're probably going to try to trade the rooks. After which, if they take your knight, you simply take their knight, and after b takes c3, you simply play bishop takes f6. Now, this is a relatively equal position for you. However, notice how you have a much better pawn structure and a much more solid pawn structure than white does. While you only have one pawn island, which is very good, your opponent has 3 pawn islands, and his pawns are pretty split up from each other, which makes them harder to defend and which makes them easy targets with moves such as rook to b8, and pummeling down on the b3 pawn, and queen to a3. This gives you easy mobility and an easy way to attack white. And you should again enjoy this game smoothly. Now let's go all the way back and look at another plan that white has. So far we've covered white's plan of playing pawn to f3, which is the most common and the main plan in this variation. However, they also have another plan of playing simply castles, and although this might seem like it's bad for white, this will result in a fairly calm, or not exactly calm, but a much more calm game than before. After knight to d7, white has the idea of playing f4 and f5 to bust open to attack the e5 pawn. Pawn to f4, and just like before, you simply continue the counterattack with pawn to b5. If they play pawn to f5, you simply play bishop to c4, and what this does is that it forces a trade of light-squared bishops. Notice how white's light-squared bishop is actually an extremely powerful piece, so trading your light-squared bishop for their light-squared bishop is actually a good trade. After this, they have to move their knight to c1, and after a move such as queen to c7, white should enjoy a fairly calm game, with ideas such as knight to c5 to attack the e4 pawn, and with ideas of attacking the b2 pawn with rook to b1 and possibly even doubling up on the b file. White also has the opportunity, or could have the opportunity, to play d5 in the future, and if you can do so safely, then you most likely should, as when you play the Sicilian, if you can execute d5, you will most likely have equalized the game. Other than that, I really hope you enjoyed this video about the English attack. If you have any questions about the English attack or want to know some specific variations or just have some suggestions for future videos, please leave them down in the comment section below. I will respond to you as soon as I possibly can. Other than that, I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please consider dropping a like on my video and subscribing to my channel if you're new. And check out one of my previous videos, which will pop up on your screen in a few seconds. Thank you all for watching and have a nice day. Goodbye.